Hello and welcome to the third episode in my Tracks Through Time series. This time we'll be looking at Waterloo Station before it was rebuilt in the early 20th century, and we'll be looking at why the station was rebuilt. This is usually cast as a technological or operational matter, and it is, don't get me wrong. But on the flip side, I think there are cultural elements, there are political elements that play into the reasons why the London South Western Railway chose to spend what at the time was a vast amount of capital in rebuilding its London terminal. So I think first it's useful to understand the timeline of the station from its opening in 1848 right up to the end of the 19th century. The station had been added to, modified, altered since it had opened in 1848, and originally it had two platforms. Well, it had platforms on either side, and as traffic increased over the 19th century it was gradually enlarged. So firstly, let's get an idea of how much the traffic grew on the London South Western. In 1860 the company was dealing, or its total passenger numbers across its network were around 6,900,000. But by 1900, this had exploded. The number had grown considerably, and it had reached 63,710,000. Problems started rising in the sort of congestion and the bottleneck in towards Waterloo. A large amount of traffic growth is concentrated in the London district of the company, it's a sort of suburban commuter zone. So the development of Waterloo is very much driven or is influenced by that pressure. There are numerous expansions. So as I mentioned, it was a small station. In 1860 they added 4 new platforms on the north side of the station, serving the Windsor lines. This structure soon grew unsuitable for the network, and this led to another expansion on the south side of the station of 2 platforms in 1878. And only a few years later, in 1885, they have another expansion, and this adds 6 new platform roads on the north side. What that means is, from this quite small station in 1848, it becomes, by the late 19th century, by the 1890s, one of the largest stations in Britain, if not the largest, with 19 platforms. I think something that is forgotten when this expansion of Waterloo is considered is that another project was going on. The company from 1870s starts expanding its running lines, the number of tracks leading out of the station to relieve that bottleneck. In 1878 the company has 698 route miles, and only 1% of that is more than double tracked. By 1902 the company has 916 route miles, but by that time 5.57% of the network is actually more than double tracked. The returns show us that 35 miles of the company's network had 4 or more running lines. So this is a considerable expansion, and to give you a indication of the scale of the investment, in 1892 the company purchased the Southampton docks for about £1.2 million, so a huge amount of money at that time. Between mid-1885 and the December of 1897 they spent 1.6 million on expanding the number of tracks on the main line. So what you get is a situation where the company is investing heavily in the network, but it's important to say this is always running behind demand. The company never gets ahead of the pressure it's got on its network. This means that passengers are annoyed at the service they receive from the London South Western, but Waterloo becomes a sort of focal point for problems. Because of the different constructions and additions to the station, it's essentially 3 stations that are interconnected. The other thing that happens is that there's uncertainty about platform numbers. In 1897, an article in Railway magazine talks about the fact that, unlike other London termini, at Waterloo, trains for different destinations or coming in from destinations didn't have like set platforms. Windsor trains might depart from any number of platforms and vice versa. It gains a reputation, and the most famous representation is in the novel Three Men in a Boat by Jerome K. Jerome, and I'll read you a little bit because I think it sums up the feeling of frustration the passengers had navigating all these different platforms. We got to Waterloo at 11 and asked where the 11.5 started from. Of course, nobody knew. Nobody at Waterloo ever does know where a train is going to start from, or where a train, when it does start, is going to, or anything about it. The porter who took our things thought it would go from number 2 platform, while another porter, with whom he discussed the question, had heard a rumour that it would go from number 1. The station master, on the other hand, was convinced it would start from the local. So you get a real sense of a passenger just not sure about where this train's going to go from. This reputation is widely understood and widely recognised. In 1899, when the sort of plans to rebuild the station are announced, there's a flurry of letters in the Times about the state of Waterloo, the state of the South Western, and the problems with the traffic. And I'll quote you one of these letters. If at most London stations, including the busiest of all, Liverpool Street, it is possible to see at any time of the day what platform any train in the day or night departs from, why should it not be at Waterloo? So the question I kind of want to ask now is, did the company rebuild the station because of the complaints about it amongst the general public, the operational concerns, and connected to that, was the continued running line expansion also related to the operational concerns? Well, of course, operational concerns played high in the mind of the railway company. They wanted an efficiently working system. But I think it's easy to sometimes forget that context is very important here. The railway company was under no legal obligation to invest in its network in the way it did. It could have easily priced out of the market many of its passengers, and it could have only supplied services to a small number of people. So it didn't go down that way, it went to invest, and that is a response to the conditions under which it worked. That by the late 19th century, the railways are in a situation where they are perceived as public servants by the general public, but also it is perceived that they are working to actively make profit at the expense of farmers, the public, etc. So railway safety comes to the fore, and the railways are accused of not investing in enough railway safety technology. Then in the 1880s and 1890s, the railways are accused of setting goods rates too high, effectively harming the nation's economy. So the railways are aware that to not act as public servants might mean that the public outcry would rise and grow, and that the politicians might react in ways that restrict their commercial freedom. They do that, but the fear is even more restrictive legislative actions. So when we consider the rebuilding of Waterloo in the early 20th century and the widening of the running lines that went on into the Edwardian period, I think we need to think about the operational benefits that accrued to the railway company, as well as the sorting out of Waterloo's annoyances for passengers. But I also think we need to keep in mind that the company, the London South Western Railway, were also trying to project an image about the railway and its public service attributes, about how it was acting in the public interest. That's my show. I hope you enjoyed it, and see you next time.